Hello, everyone. Welcome to Libraries in Response, session 132 in our series. And let me get this up. And today we are privileged to have Stephen Heintz, who we'll introduce here shortly, discussing his recent essay, A Logic for the Future. Extraordinary work. We had the link, of course, in registration. Hope people have had a chance to read it and look it over and try to grasp some of the implications of this extraordinary document. Well, my name is Don Means. I'm the director of Gig Libraries Network, your producer, or maybe co-producer, I could say, along with the International Federation of Library Associations Institutions, our longtime partner in this since we started, and before that in our work on universal public access. Uh, as I said, our excellent speaker, Stephen Heintz, we'll get to him momentarily here. But we also want to thank, of course, our sponsors, the state libraries of New Jersey, Texas, Washington, and Delaware, as well as Mission Telecom, whose support is vital to this. And by the way, we're open to new sponsors and supporters. Contact me through any media that's at your disposal, and I'll be happy to talk about it. All right. We have we've been in business since the pandemic was declared. That's how we got started in response to the pandemic itself. What does it all mean? What is it? What's a library if the building is closed and it's not nothing but what? And so that just started things rolling, and it was just one crisis after another, a veritable cascade of crises from the health crisis to the social crisis to the economic crisis to the political crisis, the ever-present climate crisis, and now we have AI entering the stage as a new crisis, a challenge for society to deal with. We've had 131 sessions to date, over 250 really outstanding speakers of all types, number of registrations, and then we're approaching twice as many recording views as actual registrations as people go back or can't make it for the first time. Like today, there's a lot of people are already celebrating Labor Day. But we will have this one, and it will be up on our YouTube channel, as they all are, within a day or so. This is our metaphor for libraries, the Swiss Army knife of communities. They do more things for more people than any other public institution by far. It's just phenomenal when you start looking at it and seeing so many different things, and for really very, very large number of people. Roughly half the population in the U.S. are active library card holders. But they have a challenge is that as a term mission creep, everybody that comes in with a new problem, it's like a new service. Well, okay, we'll get into radiology or immigration. I mean, anything that people come in with, they're interested in, want to learn about, or need help with, they ask the library. If it's a disaster, they become a crisis response center. If there's no communication in the city, they become a communication hub. So it's a big challenge for libraries as their mission, as the service demand grows, their budgets don't grow. Some of them are actually shrinking, but not everywhere. It's a wide variety of how communities support their libraries. Some very active, some not so much, but they are remarkable. This is our kind of our go-to illustration for the circumstance, the crisis circumstance we're facing here. And it hit me as I was looking at this yet again. Who is I? We have this I, the world. Okay, the world is I. I mean, it's not an I, it's an aggregate of a lot of I's and as a we, but it doesn't exist as a we. other than just sort of de facto, but it's not organized as a we. It can't deal with things itself totally. It has to deal with everything, kind of individually or nationally or, all the different subdivisions. Um, but in fact, these challengers on the other side of this shield, such as it is, are all human made. Those are all, and including, of course, the pandemic itself, are all a result of the actions of the world. And so, as Pogo, if any of you remember that far back, used to say, we have met the enemy and he is us. So, yeah, our vision of this is that the libraries are a subset, of course, an encapsulation of civilization, and that increasingly, as community organizations in the aggregate, they support the world in dealing with all these challenges. And it's our mission to support them in that support to the extent that we can make any difference at all, but we try. This is the big kahuna of crises. I mean, we can look at these other things. Yeah, yeah, those are big, really big deals, but this is the big deal, and it's just astounding that we're, whistling past this particular graveyard. But this statistic here kind of gets, well, statistics, they get your attention, but it's just numbers, right? This is just numbers on a screen here. Well, what's the reality of that? Easy to imagine it's just more statistics and it doesn't really matter. But in fact, it does matter because we're seeing it in other statistics and we're seeing that in reality. We've been tracking this particular graph for a number of years as it goes up, and these are the billion-dollar disasters. This is the US, of course. And it's really climbing pretty dramatically, but it's actually climbing even faster and yet even faster. So we're experiencing these disasters. I was just thinking today, would Houston have been built the way Houston was built if Harvey had arrived, I don't know, 20 or 30 years earlier? I doubt it. I think there'd be a completely different Houston if that had happened. So there are a lot of circumstances like that where we're kind of after the fact, but we're stuck with the built environment. This is a happy story, so I just included it because they're so rare. But this was a California project where the utility has these 100,000 homes participating in an experiment, a demonstration to feed electricity, surplus electricity, stored electricity to these homes into the grid. They've got collectors and batteries, and from these batteries, they fed 535 megawatts into the grid at a peak demand time, and it just made the difference. The kind of thing that we say, well, we have to have constant power for those peak demands. Well, this was a remarkable demonstration of, there's a lot of power out there, and in the aggregate, you could add a 0 or 2 to this number of homes, and you would add a 0 or 2 to the number of megawatts that are available to use in that. This is really a big deal, and it's both a decentralization story and an aggregation, a centralization of that. So that's cool to our way of thinking. China is hard to ignore. We'll spend a little time talking with Stephen about China, because that was when we first encountered each other. I had the pleasure of hearing Stephen appear at the Long Now Foundation. It's now been a few months ago, I believe, Stephen. You were on the stage with Kim Stanley Robinson, the great science fiction writer and thinker of our time, and talking about geopolitics and the kind of the history and the moment of time, mostly focused on the evolution of Western civilization and the remarkable accomplishment of the EU. I mean, it's mind-boggling when you think about those countries for that long in such a state of conflict came together to a large extent combine sovereignty and make, collective decisions from where they were before. It's not perfect. It's actually, it's really highly challenged. But to even get this far has been for us the primary demonstration of a basis for hope for the whole world. If the world can do anything close to what the UN is doing, we have a chance. If they can't, if we can't, if I can't, said the world, I don't know. I think we'll just, keep hammering away at each other until we're in a big pile of rubble. But China is stepping up. There's no question about that. And it's remarkable. It's gone from since I was first going there 20 something years ago, it was just coming out, and they had a huge advantage. There was like no built electronic infrastructure. There was no digital anything. So it was a clean slate. They could just bring in the very latest technology and go from there. And go from there for China. The problem that China loves more than anything is the problem of scale. Just give us a problem and that we can amplify a solution by 1,000, by 1,000,000, and we just love that. And they're really extraordinarily good at that. And they have done a demonstration of that with this clean energy, and they're leading the world suddenly from, well, they're the big coal burners, and we can't really do anything if China's not going to do anything. Well, to an extent that's true, because if China doesn't do anything about it, it doesn't matter what everybody else does because they're just so big. But they have done it, and suddenly it seems like almost overnight they are now pulling away from the rest of the world, certainly pulling away from the U.S. in terms of the investment and the result and the technologies that they're developing more than anybody. And it's been a real plus for them on the economic front, on the climate front, of course, and on the geopolitical front as they offer this low cost technology to countries around the world, especially the developing countries that are so hungry for energy and the kinds of things that China is making in scale. So this is this interesting switch from where they were and where they are now, and how the U.S. just doesn't know what to do about it because, well, we want this to happen, but we don't want them to do it all. We don't want to suffer from it. Increasing resilience on China may offer the cheapest, most efficient route in meeting our decarbonization targets, but China's state-sponsored competition presents a threat to our productive and clean tech and automotive industries. And as you may well know, the automotive industry in Europe and in the US, it does not know what to do with these 10, 15, $20,000 excellent automobiles that run on electricity, that run on batteries. Uh, so it's not a tiny industry. And this is just another example how embedded we are, or rather how embedded infrastructure is into civilization, how civilization is an infrastructure. So how might libraries fit into all this? This is kind of we've done a few sessions on library diplomacy. They've been interesting, especially to not all librarians, I mean, who are so focused on their communities and the daily needs of their communities, but yet there are a number of librarians who are interested in the world at large. And the world at large is, of course, shaped by these phenomena, and then, of course, the response to those. And geopolitics is how I, as a unit, as a world, respond to these kind of changes. So these are some aspects of library diplomacy that are interesting and are active, but we think could be much more active. And hopefully, Stephen will give us any kind of take on how he sees that might happen. So this is a wonderful quote here. We're just about to get to Stephen. You'll stop hearing me go on. The future of our country depends on Americans believing change is possible and that their participation matters. If we believe local communities are key to making this all happen, deeper connections, increasing trust, reimagining civic life are necessary. And that the challenge of designing better international systems is a difficult one, but to ignore that necessity of reform is far greater failure than striving and failing. Stephen, if there was ever an example of a difference between hope and expectation, I think this is it. So we are to you happily, Stephen, and I am so pleased to have you, and we all are, and certainly should be, that you've taken the time to share your experience, your perspectives with us on how you think this is all going. Your essay is just a remarkable encapsulation of an extremely complex set of issues that come together demanding responses. And so, if you would take us around the world on that, and we'll get into any of these topics that you'd care to pursue or that may come up. Thank you very much for joining us and take us away.
Wonderful, Don. Thank you very, very much for having me. I'm delighted to be having this conversation with you and the others that are online with us. And the more I've gotten to know about libraries in response, the more I've been impressed with how you've organized this community and what it's contributing to the kinds of challenges that we face. And of course, I fundamentally agree with you that libraries are a remarkable and in many ways underappreciated asset in society, and that elevating the value of libraries and the services that they perform and the space they provide to people is a really important mission. So I'm going to try to share a few thoughts just to kind of stimulate the conversation. But I really look forward to our conversation and discussion. I want to just say at the beginning, for viewers who may not be familiar, a little bit about the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. We are a philanthropic foundation established by the third generation of the Rockefeller family in 1940. So the Rockefeller brothers were the grandchildren of John D. Rockefeller. And so that included Nelson Rockefeller, David Rockefeller, Lawrence Rockefeller, Winthrop Rockefeller, and John D. Rockefeller III. And their father, John D. Rockefeller Jr., turned to these young men at the time in 1940 and said, essentially, boys, it's time for you to get serious about philanthropy, because this is what I think is the most important aspect of our lives as Rockefellers. And if you prove to me that you can work together successfully and have some impact, I will give you more resources to work with. So that was the origins of the foundation. Of course, this is 1940, so then these young men all went off to serve our country in the war years in various ways. And when the war was over, they came back and they started working more, completely in developing this foundation. Today, we are a foundation with an endowment of roughly $1.3 billion. So we're not huge. We are still one of the 100 largest foundations in America, but the world of philanthropy has been growing around us, and I would say in the next few years, we will be in the next tier of the 200 largest foundations. One of the things that distinguishes us from the Rockefeller Foundation, which is somewhat larger, is also the fact that in our case, half of our board of trustees are members of the Rockefeller family, now in the fourth and fifth generations. And at the Rockefeller Foundation, I think they may have one Rockefeller family member still serving on the board, but it is not really that closely associated with the family at this point. At RBF, we essentially work on three sets of issues in the US and around the world: strengthening the quality of democratic governance, combating climate change, and promoting peace. And obviously, these are interconnected issues. They are very complex issues. They are very long-term issues. And so we do take a long-term view. So in the last couple of years, my personal work has really been focused in two related areas, but they're also in some ways quite distinct. The first is thinking about the future of the international system, the multilateral system. And the second, thinking about the future of American democracy. And the first case, the international system, Don has presented my essay, which is called A Logic for the Future, International Relations in the Age of Turbulence. And I'll start with this, and then I will turn to US democracy. And in both cases, I'm going to weave in some thoughts about the role of libraries in these questions. So as Don has very well said, and as the cartoon wonderfully captures, we are living in an age of exceptional turbulence. We have wars of aggression raging in Ukraine, where over 1 million lives have now been lost, Russian and Ukrainian, civilian and military. The major violent conflict in the Middle East. In fact, there are 182 violent conflicts raging around the world today, destroying lives and livelihoods. And this is the largest number of violent conflicts in 3 decades. We have the accelerating climate crisis, as Don has talked about, which is also, as the slide in the bar chart shows, taking, costing lives and livelihoods and destroying property and destroying economic value in increasing rates. It's also causing it's kind of turbocharging what is already the worst period of forced displacement and migration in human history. And that is a statistic from our former CIA director, Bill Burns. And as we look around the world, we see that political polarization is crippling many of the world's leading democracies, and authoritarianism is on the rise. And at the same time, there's a growing need for public sector investment, and yet debt levels around the world have also reached unprecedented levels. And finally, this age of turbulence is also being fueled by, in my own view, many of the policies and statements and actions of the administration in Washington. So we have now this age of turbulence, which I really think is distinctive. Everyone will look at history and say, well, history is a story of turbulence. We look at the turbulence of wars, of plagues, of things throughout history, but I think this is a very different kind of period of turbulence, because it's the confluence of these forces acting together simultaneously: geopolitical, economic, technological, sociological, environmental, that are fueling the turbulence that we face. And in addition, many of the consequences and the causes of the turbulence are transnational or even planetary, global in cause and consequence. And that means they are far less amenable to solutions taken by one state, one nation, or even groups of states and nations. And finally, we are really facing 3 interrelated risks that have the potential to be existential threats. Climate crisis is one. An accelerating nuclear arms race between the US, Russia, and China is another. And the third is the advent of these potentially hyper-disruptive technologies like AI, but not only AI, also neurotechnologies and biotechnologies, all of which have can offer humanity great promise, but at the same time can present great peril. So these 3 existential threats also happening simultaneously. So what we then see is that the institutions and logic that have guided international problem solving, the management of global affairs, is simply not up to the task that we face in the 21st century. These institutions are just no longer capable. They are anachronistic, they are non-adaptive. In some cases, they're just simply obsolete. And we are operating with outmoded assumptions and anachronistic logic. And my research was kind of inspired by Peter Drucker, the management theorist, who in 1980 observed that the greatest threat in times of turbulence is not the turbulence itself, it's acting with yesterday's logic. And it seems to me that is a very apt description of where we are. We have these massive global challenges that actually cascade down and affect people in their homes and in their communities. And we are responding or trying to respond to these global challenges with yesterday's logic, when in fact we need to be thinking very differently. So I had the wonderful opportunity of spending 5 months on a sabbatical in Berlin as a Robert Bosch Academy Fellow, and I really went back and looked at the origins and evolution of the existing international system, going back to the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, and studying the evolution to the present day, and then examining some of the causes and consequences of current turbulence. And that led me to ask the question, what are the elements of the logic of the past that are still guiding our international relations and our international system? And then I interrogated each of them. I identified a dozen. There are probably more, but this is a thought experiment. I want to be very clear. I don't present this as the logic of the future. I present it as a logic for the future, as a thought experiment. I examined these 12 core elements that I identified, and I asked for each one of them, which ones should be kept in a logic for the future, which ones should be retired, which ones should be revised, and what new elements might we need to add. And I present all of this in the essay that Don has presented. And with that sense of a new logic, I then say, all right, what would this new logic tell us about the ways we need to go about building an international system for the future that can help us get to the end of this century with less violent conflict, more broadly shared prosperity, and a sustainable and thriving planet. And I offer 10 building blocks of a new international system. I am going to spare you the details in my opening remarks here, but I'm happy to answer questions about them if you are interested. Let me just now connect this body of work, this idea of a logic for the future and the building blocks of a new international system, to the role of libraries. As Don said, libraries really are kind of the Swiss Army knife. And while we don't want to overburden them with things that detract from their core mission contributes substantially to the process of developing and adopting a new logic for the organization of society, for governance, for citizenship, and for our ability to tackle these massive and complex global challenges. Because the challenges play out at the local level and people are experiencing them in their daily lives, they need resources in their communities, in places that they trust, with their fellow citizens, with their neighbors, who can learn together and discuss together and debate together and work together, both to help build resilience in their communities, to prevent future crises, and to think together about how to contribute to the larger questions about governance and problem solving in the years ahead. I think of libraries as places that both preserve memory and create new knowledge. They connect fields of knowledge for people in ways that they wouldn't otherwise experience themselves on their own. They help communities to develop a community spirit and a sense of being in things together and wanting to help each other through difficult times. They're guardians of the long term. They look back and protect the past, but they are guardians of the future as well. And I think libraries are a place where people come together across all kinds of differences, different lived experiences, different races and ethnicities and genders, different political perspectives, and have the opportunity to be in a calm space and think together, learn together, and work together to build better communities. And I think that is really going to be essential as we think about a logic for the future that works for people and for the planet. So now let me turn to American democracy, and I'll do this relatively quickly because I do want to get to the question soon. You know, it's pretty clear that American democracy is in a serious crisis. And this is not a crisis that, you know, started in 2020 or 2024 or 2016. This is a crisis that has been building for more than 40 years, but it has reached a very acute level. And it is a crisis of trust. It is a crisis of institutional failure. It is a crisis also of anachronism in institutions and systems. And American democracy is at risk. And so the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2018 saw this crisis developing to an acute stage and asked me to be a co-chair of a national commission of the American Academy to examine the state of American democracy and to offer suggestions about what to do to strengthen and improve the quality of our democracy going forward. So we organized a very diverse commission of scholars, researchers, practitioners, former politicians from all over the country with very diverse lived experiences, very diverse political perspectives, and we worked for 2.5 years. We did a lot of research, we examined a lot of data, but most importantly, I think, we held 50 listening sessions across the United States in all kinds of communities where we simply asked Americans to tell us their experience with our democracy, their frustrations with our democracy, their hopes for our democracy, and their suggestions for how our democracy could be more effective and more inclusive and give them a sense of optimism about the future. And we heard a lot. And it was both worrisome in many ways, and yet at the same time, very affirming, because one of the core themes that occurred in every one of those 50 listening sessions was that Americans, no matter what their political point of view is, hunger for a belief in the American future, and that they want to be engaged, they want to have agency, and they want to see opportunity for their families. So the result of this work was a final report of this commission, which we issued in 2020, and the report is called Our Common Purpose: Reinventing American Democracy for the 21st Century. And we offered 31 quite specific recommendations that include institutional reforms and process reforms, but we also addressed the question of political culture and civic life. And one of the most important recommendations, I think, in this report was to establish what we called in the report a trust for civic infrastructure. Thank you, Jen, for putting the link in the chat. A trust for civic infrastructure to support community-driven efforts to build new forms of civic life and civic capacity. And this was just an idea when we issued the report in 2020. So then we organized a working group to spend the next year actually thinking through how to build this institution. And we had all kinds of people participate in this process. It was a very open and dynamic process, and it led to the establishment of what is now called the Trust for Civic Life. And you can also easily find that on the web. And the Trust for Civic Life is aggregating philanthropic capital at the national level from national funders like the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, but now 19 other foundations and individual philanthropists have assembled a pool of capital for a 5-year demonstration program to redirect this capital in relatively small grants to community-led, community-based, community-driven efforts to build new civic infrastructure, new civic spaces, new civic life, new civic energy, and to kind of recreate the belief in the American future. And in the first 18 months of operation, I have to say I'm very impressed with what the team has accomplished in finding communities where this energy exists and it is underappreciated, under-resourced, and under-supported. And the trust is now bringing resources, bringing connections, bringing learning, and bringing evaluation into these communities as a partner. And we're seeing remarkable things that are happening. And libraries in many of these communities are at the core of this. Libraries are playing the role of civic hubs. And I'm going to give you just one example of one of the grants that has been made through the Trust for Civic Life is to an organization some of you may know, which is called Libraries of Eastern Oregon. And it's based in Baker City, Oregon. And the trust gave them a civic entrepreneur grant to expand a pilot program that uses food canning and food preservation as one of the blades on the Swiss Army knife to bring people together from their communities to collectively work in the process of food preservation and canning and to make those products available to the community, more or less analogous to the way books are loaned to people in the community. The community is producing food and preserving food and making it available through the library to the communities. And this is creating the sense of the participants, because we've already started evaluations of these kinds of projects. It's creating the sense among the participants that they can actually accomplish things when they work together. And it's overcoming the sense of isolation and the sense of loss of dignity and loss of trust. So I'm very encouraged by this, but I'm going to conclude this part with a kind of a cautionary tale. And maybe, Don, you and others remember that in October of 2019, an American writer named Monica Potts published an essay in the New York Times about her experience in her home community in Van Buren County, Arkansas, a very rural, relatively poor county of 16,000 Arkansans, excuse me, where there's one library, and there was a proposal to increase the wage for the head librarian to $25 an hour, and also combine her previous position with the new position. And yet, this increase to $25 from 19 caused a huge community backlash. And it became a terrible fight in the county. And as Monica Potts wrote in her essay, the library fight was itself a fight over the future of rural America, what it meant to choose to live in a county like mine, what my neighbors were willing to do for one another, what they were willing to sacrifice to foster a sense of community here. The library was almost lost. It was such a serious revolution in this county. It was ultimately saved when the head librarian decided she would forego the increase in her wage because she was so committed to the community and to the library. So to me, the work of rebuilding civic spirit and community and a sense of belonging is essential if we're going to resolve our democracy crisis. That library story is a microcosm of the larger problem in our society. And the future of our democracy, yes, we have all kinds of reforms we need to do of the US Congress. We need term limits on the Supreme Court of the United States. We need to get money out of politics. We need to open up the process of voting as opposed to closing it down. And all of these reforms are in the report that we issued. But unless we rebuild our civic culture from the ground up, we will not get to the reforms that we also need to need to implement. So I hope this has been a somewhat provocative opening set of reflections, and I'm eager to get into conversation with all of you.
Provocative is the word, Stephen. I mean, I got a dozen different branches off of the many things that you touched on. The last one related to money and politics just pops out. We're in the context now of tens of billions of dollars each quarter being invested in this speculative AI technology. Tens of billions every quarter. If you take $1 billion and divide it by 435, which happens to be a number and number of districts, it's it's roughly $2.5 million.
Yeah.
Just one little billion. And in the way of our political system now, that's who can say no to that? That's, running for office. It's just distorted. It's just so badly, so horribly. It's just really uh, a crime almost, I would say. And it gets to the question we posed in the registration. I have so many. I'm just going to go back to that one anyway. And that is the state of democratic capitalism. This has been our bind of these two technologies that have been in a kind of a balance for a long time that the world has blossomed on. But it is the balance has shifted so much to capital. And that then turns into what we're getting here in the US and around the world is just a preponderance of a few people deciding what's what, as
Yeah.
opposed to a population. So has democratic capitalism failed?
I would have to say, in short answer, yes. I think you said it very accurately, Don. I think we had a kind of a social contract in which we realized that capitalism has many, many advantages. It is an engine of innovation. It is an engine of wealth creation. It is an engine in meeting human needs, but it is also an engine in concentrating wealth. And we believed in a regulated form of capitalism, and we, for years, had a pretty decent balance. But now we are at a place where we have, in effect, hyper capitalism and deeply impaired democracy, and and that's a vicious circle, because the more hyper capitalism we manage, the more concentration of economic power there is, and the more economic power that is concentrated leads to more concentration of political power, and it just feeds on itself. Because as we see right now, we are in a massive period of deregulation, of tax cuts for the wealthier in our society, and that is only going to breed more of this inequality and more disaffection. And this is what we heard in these listening sessions as well, was that part of the reason people voted for Donald Trump. Obviously, there was a hardcore that are, MAGA believers, and that's their right. And then there were tens of millions of Americans who weren't full MAGA believers, but voted for President Trump because they were actually voting against the status quo, in which they felt that they had no civic agency and no future in our economy. And it gets exactly to this question. So one of the elements of the logic of the future that I have written about is moving from the neoliberal economic paradigm, the neoliberal economic model, which has produced this under-regulated capitalism and hyper wealth concentration, is to move to an economics of planetary and human well-being. And there is very interesting scholarly work being done on this. And actually some experiments around the world with implementation of policy, economic policy and fiscal policy, to create an economy that is closer to human and planetary well-being. And I think this is work that really deserves to be supported, expanded, evaluated, and considered, because if we continue with hyper capitalism and impaired democracy, we won't have a sustainable planet, and we will have a lot of human suffering and a lot of human disaffection in the years ahead. I think, Don, you froze on us? There you are. You froze for a second. Yeah.
Sorry. But I got all that.
Good.
I mean, my head is spinning from that. So we've got, we've got macro and micro and everything in between here that are all relevant. And if we could kind of stay with the macro for a moment, uh, the the uh, the system. Am I frozen?
No, you're good. No, spoke too soon. You are now frozen. You're back, Don, but you have been frozen.
All right, all right. I apologize. We can have a whole topic on connectivity in America, but not right now. Uh, when I first went to China in the mid,
Poor guy.
democratized to embrace democracy, and they said, "Well, give us time. We've got," and they stopped saying that.
I wonder if there's an opportunity to, if my voice is being heard, to ask a couple of questions of you. Would that be all right?
Sure, it's fine. And let me just say, as soon as Don gets back, I'm going to suggest that maybe he just turn off his video. Sometimes the audio connection is more stable. So, but
Yeah.
yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is the whole notion of civil discourse and how we get to a point where where that's the norm. And I don't want to say again, because I don't know if it necessarily ever was, but how do we get to a point where that has value and is really promoted as something that is, from my perspective, a prerequisite to being able to move forward in any kind of reorganization or re-envisioning, rethinking?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Don, Jen
Thank you,
just
Jim.
asked a question which I'm going to respond to. But if you keep cutting out, you might want to just turn off your video and be with us by audio, which may be more
I
stable.
might. If that were the thing, the whole thing has been dropping here. But
I see.
please go
Okay.
ahead. And
Yeah. So
I'm not
Jen was
even sure if
asking.
this conversation needs me anymore anyway. But go ahead.
Jen was asking about the need for civil discourse and how do we get to a place where there is a deeper sense of civil discourse and respect for each other despite differences of opinion and that kind of thing. And of course, in our history, we've always been contentious. Democracy is a contentious process. It's a process of competition of individuals, of ideas, of parties, etc. And so, we've always argued with each other quite strenuously. But I think we are in a period of especially vitriolic discourse. And a lot of it is fueled by social media. A lot of it is fueled by the fact that we can go online and, post something on X with very little sense of responsibility or accountability. You can even do it anonymously. And with ad hominem attacks, and it is really degrading the quality of our civic discourse. There's just no question about it. So I think that actually what research shows, it's not only what I think, but what research has shown is that the way to help people get to a better kind of respectful style of debate and discourse is not by bringing them together and talking about how can we have more civil discourse. It's actually by inviting them together to work together to solve a problem or to do something positive together. And that leads to relationships where they have more respect for each other because they've seen what others can contribute. And then you build from there. But it's a long, slow process.
I think that's great, Stephen, as opposed to let's work out our differences and discuss our systems. Let's do projects. Let's do things that are
Exactly.
practical benefit and let it grow out of that. Very good. Thank you, Jen, for picking up the slack. Our old friend Jen Nelson from the State Library of New Jersey. And there was another point earlier about the state libraries, which they play a really special role. First of all, it's a way to connect to every single library directly through these 50 or so state agencies, which is an extraordinary thing by itself. Their support has come primarily from the federal library agency, the Institute for Museum and Library Services, a very small agency at around $250 million a year, but out of which the majority of that money went through the state libraries. And then they in turn would support local projects that were meant to improve the quality of communities and libraries, and also take advantage of the federal system of the U.S., where the states are independent. They're not subdivisions of the federal government, but are their own laboratories for trying things out. But of course, the IMLS has been shut effectively. Their budget has been chopped, and so this is the state budgets, between a third and a half of these state library budgets has come from those few $100 million, not even $200 million, I think, in aggregate, across all the states, and they do tremendous amount of work. It's a big opening for something to happen because they play such an important role. Let me turn to our colleague Stephen Weiber, who has mailed in a question. He apologized for not being with us today. Stephen is the head of public policy for IFLA, and Stephen's question is kind of relates to the discussion we were having with Kim Stanley Robinson at the Long Now Foundation about long-term thinking. How do we orient ourselves? Stephen's question is, at times of rapid change and uncertainty, it can be easy to give up on thinking about the future and focus on the present. How can we build up a culture of thinking about the long term and coming to terms with instability? How can we're so absorbed, as we've demonstrated by democratic capitalism, either the next election or the next quarterly report. How can we think about, and this is what I was trying to get to before, the alternative system of longer-term thinking in China, where they have a 5-year plan and another 5-year plan. It goes on, and they were saying we'll turn into a democracy, but give us time. They stopped saying that. Now they're saying, why would anybody want that? They look at our system, they go, it's dysfunctional. Why? You do not make the case for democracy. Instead, you make the case for central planning and central control, which we thought had, gone down with the Soviet Union. And yet, here it is. They're doing pretty well. And compared to us in terms of dealing with climate crisis, they're doing better than anybody. So that was, I believe, Stephen, you said that the question of China was the central question of the 21st century when we were at the.
I did. I really do think that the U.S.-China relationship is obviously the most consequential bilateral relationship of this century. Really, as that relationship develops, so goes the future, and it's not going well. And we need to step back and rethink how we work with China and not allow a kind of Cold War mentality, a Cold War logic, which is really part of the logic of the past, to become the logic of our future relationship with China. Because if we think of it as a Cold War, it risks becoming a hot war, and the risks are very real. We know the threat around Taiwan. We know what's happening with some of the other islands in the Pacific that China has been building up and creating military bases on. We know their technological advances. We also know their cyber activities, which are, degrading U.S. and international business and government systems. So it's a very high-risk relationship. And the way we're managing it today, which is episodic engagement and Cold War mentality, risks becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So my suggestion in the logic for the future is that we should work with the Chinese government to establish a U.S.-China body, a U.S.-China secretariat, I've called it, where you would second public officials from the relevant ministries to actually work together in the same place to debate ideas, to generate suggestions, to present each country's point of view on things, to communicate back to the national capitals, but a place where work is ongoing, literally kind of 24/7 in trying to sort this relationship out and make sure that it is a relationship of competition, but not a relationship of confrontation. And it is going to be a huge challenge. I have been going to China since 1979, and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund has been working on climate change in China since 2003. And it has been challenging work, but it's work in which we've seen a great deal of progress. And I think this relationship can be managed successfully. And I think it can also be managed peacefully, but it will require a massive amount of effort. I think we've lost Don again, possibly.
At the risk of being pushy and just jumping right in here, and making good use of your time.
Not at all, Jen.
Oh, here comes Don.
All right, we'll shift over to the cell system here, backup plan. Go ahead, Jen.
Oh, I was just gonna ask if you had time for one more question, if we could entertain something from a question from the audience, the group, the whatever, in terms of what's on people's minds. You've given me a lot to think about, and I'm curious if anyone else has thoughts or observations about particularly the library's role. I know there are a lot of state library people on the call, and what we can do as agents to help people have agency to do the work that needs to happen.
Yeah, I'd be happy to hear from another participant on the call.
There were a couple of questions in the chat.
Keep in mind.
Since you're stepping in as facilitator here, Jen, did you see any there?
So, interestingly, Beverly talks about the Intellectual Freedom Committee as a process, and it's a case of what goes around comes around in New Jersey and Connecticut and a couple of other states, Rhode Island. We just passed bills that are freedom to read that call for a similar committee to be created. So, and really much more in a structural compliance-driven way than ideals-driven way, but really to deal with the problems that are inherent in that. So I think that's really fascinating. I think the other question that I had for you about the grants that you talked about is scaling. You mentioned that they were small grants. My personal belief is not everything takes a lot of money, but it does take a lot of willpower to get stuff done. So are you guys thinking about scaling or promising practices and that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, that's exactly the right question. And in fact, the way the Trust for Civic Life has been designed, as I quickly mentioned, was to launch this 5-year demonstration phase with the hope that after 5 years, with $50 million of grants to 500 civic enterprises in 4 regions of the country.
Okay.
Small town and rural America in 4 regions of the country. That with that 5-year experience, we will have collected some extraordinary stories, which we're already seeing, and some really rigorous data and evaluative material. And we're working with Johns Hopkins University, the Agora Center, Agora Institute, who are helping us with this in real time as we continue through this phase, because ultimately this needs to scale up. You know, if we can work in 500 communities between now and the end of the 5-year period, which is at the end of 2028,
Okay.
and demonstrate the impact that emerges from these efforts, we hope to then go back to the donor community, including perhaps the public sector, state governments, local governments, but even perhaps Congress at some point, to massively scale this up across the country so that the work can happen in thousands of communities, not just hundreds. And that's the aspiration. It's a very, very big aspiration, but I think it's absolutely essential, and it needs to be sustained. So that's the case we're trying to build and then prove.
I keep thinking about the various collective impact projects that are out there that are looking, a lot are around education and educational attainment for younger children and that kind of thing. But that whole sense of what is the collective impact and what has to be put together in order to make it happen. It's not a random set of factors, but finding
Right.
out what they are is I think really critical. Now, how would one stay in touch with the work that you're doing?
Well, if you go to the website of the Trust for Civic Life,
Okay.
you can definitely connect directly with the folks who are actually doing this work. I'm only was one of the originators of the idea, and I'm now on the kind of the quasi board of the trust. But the team that is actually doing this work is quite remarkable, and they devised, by the way, a participatory grant-making process. They consulted with 60 leaders from rural communities in developing how these grants would be made. And so it is very community driven, which is, I think, one of its unique features. So anyway, that's the work there. And on the logic for the future, you can stay in touch through the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Although I am retiring as president of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund next June, after which will have been 25 years in this role. So it's probably more than time that there's new leadership at this foundation.
Thank you for your generosity in answering my questions. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm delighted
I
to
don't
be
know
here.
I don't know if it's time yet, Stephen, but if you've made your decision, I'm not going to try to talk you out of it. I note that there are roughly 4,000 rural libraries in the country out of a total of around 17,000. Of course, most of those, like the population itself, are urban, but 4,000 is not an insignificant number of communities that are served. And those are, those communities are service areas. So there might be one municipality serving, or one library, one municipality serving a region of a portion of a state, and touching a lot of lives. And that's the other thing, the other plug I want to make about the state libraries is that they have a special role in supporting these under-resourced facilities. The big systems, Boston and San Diego, and they've got a lot of resources to do all kinds of things. But these small libraries usually don't. And so that's where the state library comes in to back them up and support them with resources they lack because of the size. And it's a really extraordinary vehicle for supporting communities. And it's such a tragedy that the federal agency, doing so much with so little money, has been chopped off of this channel. Anyway, it's something to think about and work on. We're slightly over our hour, but this is not a TV show, so it's okay, but we want to respect everybody's time as well. But perhaps you'd like to give us a closing statement, Stephen, and tell us where you think this is all going to go.
Yeah, well, I certainly don't know where it's all going to go. I have, to be quite honest, I wake up every morning in these times and I find myself toggling back and forth between despair and defiance, and hope. And I had 10 years of experience living and working in Eastern Europe right after the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Huh.
I worked for an international NGO that was helping to support the process of creating the new democracies of Eastern Europe and the new market economies and the new structures of international relations within and with the region. And I reflect back on that many, many times because those transformations of those countries, including the demise of the Soviet Union, were extraordinary events. They were revolutionary events in which very few lives were lost and profound change was accomplished, which surprised everybody, including the participants. I happen to have had the opportunity to visit Berlin in October of 1989, and I went through Checkpoint Charlie from west to east to meet with the US ambassador to East Germany. Spent the day on the east side, went back through Checkpoint Charlie to the west, and I said to myself, this division of this city, the division of this society, is an appalling result of the Cold War, and I can't imagine it's going to change in my lifetime. And 1 month later, the Berlin Wall was opened. And nobody anticipated it, not the CIA, not the KGB, not the Germans, and it happened. And from that moment, the spread of possibility extended across the region of Eastern Europe. And one by one, the countries began their own process of pretty peaceful transformation. And so I look back on that, and that's what gives me hope. Human beings are inventive. Human beings are resilient. Human beings have the future embedded in them. And if we just call on those resources within each one of us and do it collectively, we can build the future that we need. So I want to thank you all for having this conversation with me and inviting me to share some thoughts. I've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. I still have just pages of questions, but we're going to have to leave those for another time. And it'd be great to have you come back and, we could revisit the state of things maybe later this year, and because things are happening so quickly. Let's see if we can find a fall date and pick this conversation up again, Stephen. Thank you again, and
thank you all.
I'm going to stop the recording. I'm going to try to stop the recording.